88 Company business. Thank you very much.
Wow, welcome back to another edition of Jim Brown's Sky Blue History Podcast. I think I'd introduce it differently every week, don't I?
Yes.
But it's a Sky Blue History Podcast with Jim Brown and myself, Claudio Cardellino. And of course, this week we're going to talk about the history of Highfield Road, which I believe somebody had written in, did they? Did someone write in?
They did. Off the top of my head, I can't remember, but yes, they did. Whoever it was, thank you for the suggestion.
Yes, and if you see at the bottom of our screen, when you do watch it on YouTube, you can contact us if you want us to talk about any particular part of the of our Sky Blue history. Of course, just please email Jim at clarryborton@gmail.com, and we'll try and talk about as many subjects as possible. But quickly and briefly, obviously the start of the season is fast approaching. We're only a few days away. And because we're going to talk about Highfield Road, I'm just thinking of one match at the start of the season at Highfield Road from memory. For me, I'm going to go for 1987-88 season at home to Spurs. It just seemed the irony of we're playing Spurs after we just beaten them in the cup final, and we had the home fixture, and because we beat them, it kind of, I don't know, it's almost like it said, look, yeah, we beat them in the FA Cup, we are that good, we beat them in the league as well. And it just felt like a start of a new era. I mean, it didn't quite go to plan, but that's, for me, from memory, that's one of my favourite first day matches, basically, at Highfield Road. What about you, Jim? Have you got a favourite one or a memorable one?
Yeah, one very memorable one was the opening game of the 66-67 promotion season, when there was a blistering hot day, and we played Hull City, who came in their usual gold shirts with black shorts, and it wasn't a particularly exciting game, but City won with a Dietmar Brook effort from 35 yards. Obviously it turned out to be the start of a memorable season. Yeah, that would be one of my favourites.
And of course, unique, because it was the first time ever, and you can't repeat it, can you? And you were there.
Yes.
It's magnificent. So let's start talking about the history of Highfield Road. And where would you like to start?
Well, it was our home for 106 years. So there's quite a lot of things happen there. I just thought it'd be nice to concentrate on some of the changes that took place over the 106 years, how the ground developed, and talk about some of the great games that took place there. The ground was opened in September 1899, and the first visitors were Shrewsbury Town in a Birmingham League match, and the ground cost about £350 to develop, and it was done over just a matter of months, to be honest. And the ground had a grandstand, which I think we've got a picture of.
We certainly have. So if you're watching on YouTube, there's a very grainy photograph of a grandstand, and yeah. I think very typical of most stands in those days, I'd have thought.
And that stand was on what became the main stand side, where the players came out, in later days. It was called the John Bull stand because of the advert along the top. It was advertising John Bull, which was a very popular magazine at the time.
I suppose if you're listening on Spotify, it's basically a long stand with lots of pillars and a fairly shallow roof, isn't it? I'd imagine. Just let the rain come off.
Yes, and there are only actually 12 rows of seats.
Ah.
And it could hold about 1,500 people, I think.
Majority of stands in those days, that's what it was, wasn't it? You had the one stand, and then the rest was pretty much all open to the elements, wasn't it?
Well, that's right, and it stayed like that at a lot of grounds right up to the 1970s and 80s. So that was the first ground. I think it was quite a posh ground for the Birmingham League, I would have thought.
Well, it looks a little bit like Leamington's ground now.
The rest of the ground was just basically a low bank. There were no terraces, and the banks weren't very high, so the capacity was maybe about 5,000 or 6,000.
And also, I mean, football was in its infancy, so this is always a risk to take, isn't it, in the early days, because no one knew what we know now. It could have died a death after 20 years, couldn't it, football? It just took off, didn't it, for some reason?
It was, and the club wasn't in a very good financial state. In fact, if I remember rightly, as they prepared to move the ground to this site, they asked the players to forego their wages for the last few weeks of the season. The club were in debt, but they really wanted to do something, get a decent ground, and it was their land as well. They'd actually bought the land. So it was exciting times, and the first home game was watched by about 3,000 people, when previously they'd be lucky to get 1,000 for home games.
So in what, 100 and where are we now? 126 years? No, yeah,
125 years this year. Yeah,
125 years. Football's not really changed then, because there's still clubs having to forfeit their wages. The likes of Wigan in the past, and I think Derby and all sorts have had to do it.
Yes,
for a club to survive. So yeah, they've not learnt the lesson, have they?
No. So the early seasons there were pretty poor. The team finished, the bottom half of the Birmingham League, and they even had to apply for re-election to the Birmingham League in 1905. And the other interesting thing about it, when the ground was first, I won't say built, because it wasn't really built. The stand was built, but when the ground was first opened, there were no houses around the stadium.
I was going to ask that. So was it just green field then?
Yes, it was. Beyond the Swan Lane end, it was green fields. But what happened in the early years of the 20th century? There was a massive amount of house development around the ground. Highfield Road was built, Nichols Street, Catherine Street, all these streets around the King Richard Street. They'd all developed in the first 5 or 6 years of the 20th century, but there were still open fields on the other side, and there was in actual fact there was a footpath led from the junction of Highfield Road and Thackor Street down to Swan Lane. There was no road there. It was a footpath where the Mercer's Arms eventually appeared. So it was quite a rural spot, I guess. But as I said, the houses were being developed. But in 1905, they had their first refreshment bar at the stadium. And I did have a picture of that. I should have sent you that one. It was quite a posh looking refreshment bar.
But they sold beer at the ground in 1905?
I think so, because there's always been beer at football, hasn't there?
Yeah. I'd imagine.
What would we do without beer at football?
I'll tell you what, sometimes it's the only way to get through a match, isn't it? Beer at football.
Yeah. But there would have been beer because the catering was done by the contract for the catering was given to a guy called John Tipping, who was landlord of the Vauxhall Tavern in Hillfields.
Oh right. So no, I don't remember the Vauxhall Tavern. Is that whereabouts was that then?
Do you know? I don't know.
Yeah, well, we did this thing at work the other day. We named about 12 pubs all around the ground, and that's one of. And it's probably changed name, hasn't? No doubt. If you're watching, if anybody knows or listening where the Vauxhall Tavern was, let us know.
Yes,
because we used to go to the Binley Oak.
The Binley Oak. That was quite close to the ground, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was our favourite one. So
the sort of next major event is when the club had a really good FA Cup run in 1907-8, and they got to the first round proper, and played Crystal Palace at home, and who were then a Southern League side. Before the game, before the draw, everybody wanted, we'll have a first division side, and we ended up getting Crystal Palace, who were okay. The Southern League was strong. It was felt to be as strong as the Football League Division 2, but it was a bit disappointing. But they had a good crowd. I think it was about 7,000, and they had to do a fair bit of work to improve the stand. I think it was 7,000. But no, sorry, I beg your pardon. I've just found it. It's almost 10,000. But the club had been expecting 12,000, so that was a new ground record for the club. And that cup run put City on the national map. And that summer they applied to join the Southern League and got voted into the Southern League. The club's image was elevated, and as a result of that, they built some new dressing rooms. They started producing a program regularly, and they even had the first wooden half-time scoreboard at the Swan Lane end.
That's an exceptional crowd. It's non-league football, wasn't it? I mean, it's
yeah. Well, the FA Cup was very prestigious in those days. Yeah, very prestigious. But then the next, the next major event at the ground was the cup run of 1909-10, when the Southern League, battling Southern League team beat two First Division clubs. They won at Preston. They beat Portsmouth, who were a second division side, and beat Forest at home, who were a first division side. And there was massive interest, and the capacity at that time had been increased to about 20,000. They put in crush barriers on the banks. They put temporary seats in front of the main stand, the grandstand, and of course they beat Forest. That was a massive victory. I think the crowd was 12,500, a new ground record. They were through to the quarterfinals, and they got paired with Everton, who were in the top half of the First Division, a very, very strong team. Several internationals in their team. There was thoughts that the game might be switched to Goodison Park to take advantage of, get a bigger crowd and more money for Coventry. And they even talked about switching it to Villa Park. But in the end, the club resisted, and they resisted the lure of a massive payday. But they increased the prices. So instead of being sixpence to get into the the ground, it was a shilling. It sort of doubled the price.
Oh.
You can imagine that these days, can't you?
Yeah, if we got a top team at home, Man City, and Doug King said, right, it's 70 quid.
Yes. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, that wouldn't surprise me. That would not surprise me. So was that the year Tottenham won the cup? They won it in 1911, didn't they? So was that the same?
No. Tottenham won it in 1901.
1901 as a non-league side, weren't they? They were, I think.
Yes. Everton beat us obviously, but they lost in the semi-final to Barnsley.
Right.
So now, how many police do you think were on duty for the big game against Everton?
I reckon there'd be probably two, one on a horse and one with a whistle.
Oh no, 34.
34.
34 policemen, yeah.
I've got a fantastic magazine called Pastime Magazine from the turn of the century, and it talks about Preston and Aston Villa FA Cup match where there was loads of crowd trouble, where the police had to get involved and keep the crowds back. It seems to be in existence in football from the year dot, I think.
Yeah.
I think it was
you're right.
Working men who've been to work, they have a few pints and then the game starts. And of course, there was no like segregation really. It was a lot of these grounds back in the day. Some of the stadiums only had a cord around the side to keep the people off the pitch. So there was encroachment and all. It was. I was reading the article. It just made me laugh because it sounded no different to what it is now, basically.
No. Well, the police were actually kept pretty busy. I've done quite a bit of research on that cup run, and there were a number of pickpockets were apprehended, as well as pirate program sellers, and some rogues were even shouting outside the ground. Were shouting important team changes in both teams. And actually, this is the needless to say that was an invention, as both sides lined up as you know they originally expected to. This is almost like social media these days, where with fake news.
Yeah. That's funny.
Yeah, it was a great experience, and the crowd was they packed them in. The crowd was 19,000. With record receipts of £1,052, and with the proceeds of the cup run, they built a new grandstand on the opposite side to the John Ball side. So it's on the Highfield Road side or the Thackhall Street side, and that cost £1,200. And it was we got a picture of that one.
We certainly have.
I think that picture of the Man United game is a good example of it.
Is it the Atkinson new stand? Is that?
Oh, that's the one. Yes, that's it. So that was just taken a couple of years after the stand was built. But very nice stand for its time, I think.
Yeah, that's taking shape as a ground now, isn't it?
Yeah. But you can see it's still a bank at this end. This is this is what became the covered end, or what they called the city end in those days. And then at the Swan Lane end, you still had all those trees behind the bank. Yeah. It's a great picture, isn't it?
It is. If on Spotify, we'll try, obviously the stand that we mentioned in the first few minutes is still there. But opposite that, you got this Atkinson Fine Ales stand. I think that sounds there, and it looks like a fairly modern day stand, just with the one tier. Yeah, it's a standard. What you expect to see at a non-league ground, basically, even today.
Yes, yeah, and that held over 2,000.
That's
but the problem was the club put the the prices up in that stand and left the old prices in the old stand. So in the early days of that stand, it was half empty, but the old stand was round.
That'd be like Fulham's new stand, because that's like ridiculous, isn't it? I don't know, £5,000 for a season ticket or something.
Yeah. So we had a couple of good cup runs after that. We entertained Man United in 1913 and got buried 5-1. But I'm just looking. The run up to the Second World War, the club were drifting, rarely causing any problems in the league, in fact, in 1914-15, they got relegated to the second division of the Southern League and played a lot of very average Welsh clubs that season. So then we obviously got the First World War, and at the just before I move on, the Man United game attracted a new record crowd, 20,042, which was
still is a non-league side, isn't it?
Yeah, but you've got to remember the Southern League was like the third division in those days. And in fact, in 1920, the Southern League, most of the Southern League teams formed the new Third Division South.
Right, of course it did, yeah.
Yeah. So then we obviously had the war. Coventry City were elected to the second division, and nothing major happened at the ground, even though we had some fantastic crowd that first season in the second division. Went up to 23,000, I think. The next change to the ground was at the city end, where they put a cover over the bank, and the cover actually came from Twickenham Rugby Ground. That was in 1927.
Was it just cheap to build things? Because they seem to be able to build new stands quite quickly.
Just an army of carpenters, basically.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, well, as we know, they weren't that safe, were they?
No.
But yeah, it just seems like fairly simple to get a stand built. I suppose planning permission would have been a lot easier in those days as well. You probably just built a stand and that was it.
I'd say an army of carpenters would just turn up and sort it out. Yeah. The other thing is the record crowd was broken that first year in the second division, 1920, when they had 23,500 to see that game, the final game against Bury. That was the result. It was ended up being the bribery game, when City had to stay up, had to win to stay up, and were useless but managed to win.
Yes, that's the
and through the 20s, the attendance record went up to 25,000 for a second division game against Fulham in 1921, and then in 1928 we had 26,000 for a cup game against Fulham, who were, I think, they were second division side.
Yeah.
And that record crept up again in Christmas Day 1929, when Plymouth, a very, very strong Plymouth Argyle side, came to Highfield Road in Third Division South, and City pulled off a shock by beating them. So this this grandstand from Twickenham.
Yeah. I mean, how did they end up getting that then? I don't understand how they got the roof from Twickenham.
Yeah, yeah. They let me just look at my notes and.
Is it made to measure?
It was a problem, I can tell you.
I bet it was.
Yeah. So so Twickenham were putting a new tier on the east stand, and the old roof was surplus, so they dismantled it and sold it to Coventry City, and the supporters club agreed to pay for it.
Oh.
And they raised £1,700 to pay for this roof. Unfortunately, the surveyor discovered there was a 7-foot gradient. Because the land sloped from north to south.
Yeah.
So it was delayed. The erection was delayed while they put made new stanchions to compensate for the slope.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. And they promised to have it ready for the 3rd of September for the date of the first home game. I'll read what the Midland Daily Telegraph said. It said, "The cover is coming on well. Lots of big, hefty men have been digging tremendous holes all over the place. And within a day or two, the main iron supports will be duly installed in beds of concrete."
I love the idea of big men digging holes all over the place. Not in the right place, just all over the place.
Yeah.
Dear, oh dear.
But the club's spokesman, he's not named. He said if they built a new cover instead of buying the one from Twickenham, it would have cost them £7,000.
Well, I mean, that's a lot of money, isn't it? Even, I mean, back then.
Yeah.
Interesting to see how much that was actually.
Yeah, and they did realise they had to put some proper concrete terracing under that roof. But they couldn't afford to do it all. So they put 7 steps in at the back at the rear of the bank. Eventually, over the years, they put complete concrete steps in throughout. And I don't quite know when, but the cover, if you looked at it aerially or even looked at it from the Swan Lane end, they had the Rex Cinema painted on the roof. An advert for the Rex Cinema.
I mean, is this a Rex Cinema in Twickenham or one in Coventry?
No. It was the Rex in Coventry.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, you're too young to remember the Rex Cinema, I guess.
I can remember the Godiva Paris Theatre one. That's and the Odeon.
So the supporters club paid for it, and then they tried to raise money to pay for it, but it was a struggle. I don't think the debt was cleared until 1933. And if you look at newspaper photos of matches in the 1930s, on wet days you can see the crowds packing under the cover, with the banks surrounding open banks empty.
Because was the Shay at Halifax? They had a mud heap behind the goal, didn't they? I'm sure they did. That wasn't unusual to have like half the stand was just like basically grass or be mud, especially in the lower divisions. It's totally different to nowadays. It's just incredible, really.
It is. But obviously, through the 1930s, the club became very successful under the management of Harry Storer, and there was money coming in, especially after promotion. And the club in 1935-36 season the club made plans that if the club won promotion to the second division, they would build a new main stand. And that's what happened. They called it the promotion stand.
Is that part of it there being built?
Yes, it is. Yeah. Yes, that's it. Yeah. You can see you can see behind it the covered end.
Yeah.
The ex-Twickenham, and then this is the what do you call it? The steel bits to hold the new main stand.
Yeah, the substructure, isn't it? It's yeah. There's no health and safety going on there, but well, and it stood there for years, didn't it? So it wasn't too bad.
Well, yeah. Well, it's built in 36. It was burnt down in 68. So it lasted 32 years, but it was for its time. It was quite a good stand, you know. Yeah. But that was built in a matter of weeks. About 12 or 14 weeks that was built.
So what was happening on the Spine Cop at this time? Was that as it is as I remember it, or was it nothing like that?
No, it wasn't. There were no terracing there until 37, 38 time.
That was a huge embankment then as well.
It was a shale embankment. And it was. I've seen pictures of they played Luton Town in the promotion 36 promotion team, and there were 42,000. That was a new record crowd. And the day after the game. The Telegraph photographer went down, and there's this picture of broken wooden crush barriers and no end of litter and everything. And I think the club realised they had to do something a bit more permanent, so they put in terracing, and they built the 1930 summer of 39. I think they extended what they call the crow's nest at the top of the cop. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that always looked scary to me.
Yeah,
I don't know who ever stood in there, but it did look a bit steep and a bit high.
No, it was fine actually. It was fine. There was never any trouble there.
There's more thought of somebody falling off the top of it. It seems quite high.
Yeah. So then we obviously had the Second World War. There was a new record crowd. The Luton crowd was surpassed when Aston Villa came to town in a second division game in March 38. Mm-hmm. That was Villa's promotion season. 44,930. A record crowd that stood until the Wolves game in 67. So then obviously had the war, and Mr. Hitler did his damnedest to destroy the Highfield Road Stadium with bombs dropped on the pitch, on the covered end and on the main stand. Some serious damage done that made the ground unfit for use for the best part of 18 months. And even after the football resumed, the covered end, the holes in the covered end weren't repaired until a couple of years later. So then looking post-war, and the ground basically didn't change. The one thing that did change, instead of Rex Cinema being painted on the roof, it became Sam Robbins, who was a local car dealer.
I've got a photo you've put up of 1950s. Oh, there it is at the far end.
Yes.
1950s Highfield Road. You can see the mark. Looks like Marston's are advertising on one stand.
Well, Atkinson's were taken over by Marston's. Marston's became one of the main club sponsors. And you can see that Sam Robbins, he was an Austin dealer.
Yeah.
Lovely, isn't it?
It is actually.
And you can see that the cop is the front of the picture. It's all it's got the metal crush barriers, and if you look at the main stand, the last thing they did before the Second World War is to put this canopy on the front of the main stand to cover the there was terracing in front of the main stand, so that canopy covered the spectators who were standing there. That's a great picture, actually, isn't it?
It is. It's really good, actually.
Yeah. Sadly, nothing much happened at Highfield Road between 1945, when they repaired the roof of the covered end, until the 1960s.
So when did we first have floodlights, Jim?
Glad you mentioned that. We did have floodlights in 1953. And they were very, very basic floodlights. They were on poles which were about 20 foot high along the edge of the pitch. And there's stories, I've read stories that fans complained that they couldn't see anything, basically.
Because there's lots of like the floodlit programs. What was off? I'm going to ask you off the top of your head. You can remember the first floodlit match?
Yeah, it was the first set of floodlights, 1953, and it was Partick Thistle.
Right, that's interesting.
I'm sure it was.
I imagine it was. Well, Wolves were playing Real Madrid and Spartak Moscow and all the rest of it.
Yeah, you joke, but Partick Thistle were a top Scottish team.
Oh yes, but they beat Rangers, didn't they, in the cup final around about that sort of period? I think probably just before. I'm sure they did.
You know, I've made a mistake there. It wasn't Partick Thistle. It was Queen of the South.
Queen of the South, right?
Yeah. Who were a top? Well, I say top six Scottish First Division side. No mugs at all. So my apologies for getting that wrong. I should know that. The second set of floodlights were erected in 1957. And the first game was Third Lanark, another Scottish team.
Yeah.
You've got the programme, no doubt.
Oh, it's one of those programs that for some reason, for years I thought I didn't have it, and I kept buying it, and I ended up with about 4 copies. You know, it's like, don't you? You forget, and I've got quite a few like that. Walthamstow and the Cup is another one I've got loads of copies of for some reason. But,
you need to keep accurate records of these things.
Well, I do now.
And all of the friendlies are listed in my History of Highfield Road book.
I know they are. And you've even sent me emails with all of them written down as well. But yeah.
So the Queen of the South, October 53, it was a 1-1 draw. There was almost 17,000 there, when the previous league cape was about 11,000. So it was a novelty. And a week later, they entertained Wolves under floodlights and had 19,000. And this was Wolves, the Billy Wright, Jimmy Mullen Wolves team. And we beat them with a 1-0 in front of 19,000.
That's awesome.
And then 2 weeks after that, we played East Fife. There we go. I knew we played East Fife. And in January, we played Nuneaton Borough in a floodlit friendly. And then a few weeks later, we played Haddock Split.
Yeah.
But by then, the crowds at the friendlies, the novelty had worn off, and the crowds dropped to 4,000 and 5,000. But City, through the 50s, cities did play a lot of floodlit friendlies against some top First Division clubs. They also played the famous game against San Lorenzo of Argentina.
Yeah,
it was abandoned in 1956.
Why was it abandoned?
Why was it abandoned? Because the Argentinian star player, Sanfilippo, kicked the referee, Arthur Ellis, because he didn't like a referee's decision.
I shouldn't laugh. Is that Arthur Ellis of It's a Knockout?
Yes, yes.
Brilliant.
Yeah. And he wrote about it very well in his biography that came out later in the 1950s.
That was not unusual in South American football. It's got to be said. It's very volatile in the 50s and 60s. If you remember those matches they used to play with the European Cup winners against the South American Cup winners, it just ended up being a brawl, didn't it? Basically.
Yeah.
So that's terrible.
It's a great shame. So there was 17,000 fans in the ground, and Ellis abandoned it after 43 minutes because he refused to refused to walk off. So that was under the original floodlights. They couldn't have been that bad. Or maybe I was exaggerating a bit, but 1957.
I got visions of these floodlights being like my floodlights I used to have for Subutio, where you put them on it, absolutely nothing.
Yes, I had one of those. I only had one.
Yeah, believe me, even with 4, it made no difference. You had to put the light on in the end. I couldn't see anything.
Oh dear. So yeah, the second floodlights, 57, third Lanark were the visitors, and there were 9,000 for that opening game.
Yeah, but that must have been exciting though if you're a Cov lad then, you know, because I mean you wouldn't see these teams, even like the Scottish sides. There's no reason for us to play them apart from friendlies. And
no,
I mean the third Lanark were a historic Scottish club as well.
Yeah,
you know, they're hugely historic.
So then we move forward to the arrival of Jimmy Hill. I think you've got a picture of what the ground looked like.
The view from the Spine Cop.
Yeah, this is on a snowy day in 1962, not long after JH arrived. The one thing you can't appreciate from that is that the pitch was sloping.
Yeah, you can see it. I can see it. Yeah.
From right to left.
Yeah, you can definitely see it.
Obviously, the old main stand still there, the Sam Robbins cover, and just see the old barrel, the 1910 barrel roofed stand there. Nothing had changed. Nothing had changed since the war.
We are so used now to seeing seats everywhere. You fully forget, don't you, how much terracing there was.
Yeah.
Sitting down was a posh thing, wasn't it, basically?
It was definitely. And there were far less, when people talk about a record season ticket sales, very few people bought a season ticket in the ground in those days. You know, the season tickets were like 2,000 or 3,000 in the stand.
Yeah.
So obviously in '63 we had the famous FA Cup run when the Sunderland game, the official attendance was 40,000, but most people reckon it was more like 46, 47,000. Followed by on the following Saturday, the Man United game, which was the first all-ticket game at the stadium.
Now you've got a photo you've given me here, which is I've got written here. Sky Blue.
A bit later.
Is that a bit later? Was it?
Yeah. If you've got the Man United, you've got the Man United picture, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. There you go. So it's now the Marston stand, and you can see it's packed, 44,000 packed in. That was all the United fans in that stand. So the first, the Robbins Hill plan after the Great Cup run was let's knock down the 1910 stand and build a new stand on that side. And if you move on to that picture you just previously showed, you can see the old stand, and at the far end is the first block of the new sky blue stand with a very novel roof.
So in the iconic roof, really. That's what you reckon? Yeah.
Yeah. So that was taken in 63-4 season, and what they did was they built the wing blocks either side of the old stand, and after the final game of the season, the demolition team moved in, knocked down the 1910 stand, and built and finished the stand off.
So if you listen on Spotify, basically it looks like something from War of the Worlds, which has been built on top of the old building, and they slowly brought it across, I presume. Which is, I mean, it's
well, they built either side of the old stand and then knocked the old stand down at the end of the season, so they could maintain the capacity up to 40,000 or more if they needed it.
So they're just basically working in between the games then.
Yeah. And they finished the blocks off. You can see in the picture that there's people sitting in the wing stand. And so the same applied at the other end of the thing. People, they actually opened the wing stand.
It's a bit of a rubbish view, though. If you sat right at the back, you're not going to see past the other roof.
No, you aren't. No. So, and what happened as well, that's the summer of 64, we had the first electronic scoreboard installed at the...
Is that the first ever in English football?
I believe so, but don't hold me to that.
Yeah, I think it is. And a lot of people reckon there was one at Everton, one at Sheffield Wednesday. But I think ours was the first one. I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is.
You have to check my book out.
Yeah.
So that's the one. Yeah, Ghosts of a Vanished Stadium.
Yeah, Ghost of a Vanished Stadium in all good books shops or Amazon or wherever you want to find it.
Yeah.
By Jim Brown. You might as well advertise your own stuff, Jim. It's your
absolutely. Podcast. Yeah, absolutely.
Amongst the other 7 books, I think, on top of this one, I think.
Yeah. I might get 50p off Amazon if they buy it on Amazon.
Yeah, well, that's it.
Yeah. So obviously City back in the 2nd division, and crowds were up. You know, our attendances were averaging 27,000 in the 3rd division promotion season. Crowds went up higher as we went into the 2nd division, and in the promotion season 66-67, the club announced that again, if we win promotion, we will build the West Stand. We'll knock down the covered end, and that's what they did. They knocked down the old Twickenham cover, and they built the West Stand in the close season. Yeah, fantastic speed to get that stand ready for the new season. Again, a matter of 12 or 14 weeks from start to finish, and it was ready for the new season.
Incredible.
In the 1st division. And the official capacity at that time was 50,000.
Right.
And I think also at that point, we had more seats certainly more seats than any other non-1st division club. And I think we had more seats than almost every club in the 1st division.
Wow. I've also got I didn't put this photo up actually, Jim. This is a sky blue stand.
Oh yes, that's it.
So you can see it going across now, can't you?
Yes. So again, that was built in the summer. You know, obviously the wing stands were there before. So crowds in 67-8 were, thanks to the new stand, we're up to 34,000 average. There are only 2 gates below 30,000. But on a fatal night in March 1968, after a reserve game, a fire broke out in the main stand and caused severe damage I never quite know how much damage, because it was actually used in part for the next home game 10 or 12 days after the fire.
Yeah, that's incredible, really. That was
Yeah.
even allowed. It seems strange. So it makes you wonder how bad it was.
But even with about half of that stand unusable, there were 47,000 in the ground for the home game with Man United.
Do you think we would have got a record crowd if it had not been for that fire?
Possibly, yeah.
Been very close, wouldn't it?
Yeah. United were very, very attractive at that time. So the club announced that they were going to rebuild it. So they built their third new stand in 4 years. Amazing.
It is
the most modern ground in Britain.
Well, it was. It definitely was. As a kid, going there, it just looked, say space age, but it did seem like a fantastic stadium.
Well, yeah, and you see pictures of other top grounds in the 1960s.
Yeah.
Which were, even Man United, they had one decent stand and the rest was pretty rough. Liverpool had one stand.
I think
Cop.
I think of Charlton, who had a massive terracing at the side, didn't they? That whole one side where it held, I don't know how many thousands it held, but it held probably 30,000 on one side of the ground. It was ridiculous. And that was all open. So apart from one end, we were fairly covered, weren't we, as a ground as well?
We were, and there were plans unveiled around 1970, 71 time, while Derek Robbins was still the chairman, for a complex to be built at the Cop end, which would incorporate a massive double-decker stand with restaurants, cafes, gyms, everything underneath. And this was the blueprint. And it was well covered in the Coventry Telegraph at the time. And of course, Derek left the club in 73.
Yeah.
And those plans fell by the wayside.
That would have been fantastic, actually.
Yeah. There was a director called John Campkin, the co-writer of the Sky Blue song, and he argued in 1970 that the club should stop building stands and start to put more money into the team.
There's an argument for that as well.
Yeah. But then, of course, nothing happened for years. We went, the club in the 1970s sort of, it lost its impetus, didn't it?
Yeah, I've got a photo here of the Cop.
Yeah, and that's the late 70s, and obviously having to meet health and safety regulations, having to put up a barrier between the away fans who were on the right-hand side of the Cop and home fans on the left. And then, of course, the next major thing that happened was the all-seater stadium, Jimmy Hill's White Elephant.
Before we talk about the all-seater, did we have executive boxes as well? When did they go in?
Good question. I think they went in 1973.
Right. And that was because I remember sitting in a box at pitch level in the main stand. But that was about 1980. Well, I was in the box when Clive Allen scored that goal. That wasn't a goal. And I was definitely at pitch level for that one.
Yeah.
And there was obviously boxes at the top of the stand. But I presume that's where they were originally, in the main stand, at the back of the main stand.
No, there weren't any boxes.
There weren't any?
No, the 1973 boxes were almost at pitch level.
So that's the one I sat in then.
Yeah.
When that was in 1980, it's obviously still there.
Yeah.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because not view from memory.
No. Yeah, so at the same time as they did that, they had to put a new roof on the Sky Blue stand. That roof, the space age roof, only lasted 10 years, which you have to question. What was that all about? And it was, of course, it was Derek Robbins's company who built all the stands.
Oh, right.
Yeah, Banbury Buildings.
Yeah.
Built all the stands. So then, yeah, we had the Jimmy Hill White Elephant, made the stadium all-seater, capacity just over 20,000. And that lasted 2 seasons, and then Jimmy went and Ian Jameson took over for 1 year, and he allowed spectators to come in. They partially reopened the Cop. Do you remember they had about 6 or 10 rows of seats at the front, didn't they, of the Cop?
And then you had a space, didn't you, between the standing and the seating? It was weird.
Yeah, very strange.
It was a real mess, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it looked like a stand that was due for demolished, to be demolished, didn't it? It was a right old mess.
Yeah, and those seats were removed a couple of years later, and the whole end became standing again.
Yeah.
Obviously, with a lot less capacity than it had been previously, and not a lot changed. Well, not a lot changed between then and the Cop being closed in 1993. We had a season where that end of the ground was not used at all, whilst they built the new East Stand.
Yes, this is it here, and
yeah.
I remember Mickey Quinn blazing a penalty over the top of that.
Yes, into where there were workmen sitting watching the game, weren't there?
Yeah, and I'd take my dad to the airport, and I rushed back, and I got in, went up the stairs of the main stand just as Mickey Quinn stepped up to take the pen, and it completely blasted over the bar. And that's the famous game with our fantastic substitute Mick Hartford, wasn't it? He played for 11 minutes, scored the winner, and then we never saw him again.
Yeah.
That was another memorable night at Highfield Road.
So if you go back to that picture you just shown, the East Stand, obviously the floodlight pylons had to be removed to build the new stand, and you can see the new floodlights along the roof of the main stand. Yeah.
It's really strange, isn't it? Because I was sat in the main stand and occasionally in the Sky Blue stand, but it was really weird when I did sit in the Sky Blue stand, how you totally see the ground differently from a different seat. Yeah. I was so used to sitting in the main stand. In all the time, I've never ever went in the West End or the Spine Cop.
Didn't you?
No, I was always.
I had a season ticket in the West Stand in the 80s, and then when they built the East Stand, I moved into the East Stand.
So you went behind the goal. No, I've always sat.
Great view.
Block Owl, row M, seat number 6. That was my seat in the main stand. And then my dad used to get free tickets and for doing the Sky Blue lottery and all that. And sometimes one of his mates would have my ticket, and I'd go with my mate and sit in the Sky Blue stand, basically.
Yeah.
So it's just weird though when you sit in a different area how it looks. I mean, even now in our stadium, before I decided to sit where I'm sitting now, I spent the whole season with Luca going round, sitting everywhere, deciding where we're going to sit, basically. And we went for block 18 in the end. Yeah. But it was it's just interesting seeing a ground from different areas, and the view of the match is totally different as well.
Yes. And I've sat in the further down in the Telegraph stand, and it is different. It's a different angle. It gives you a different perspective of the game.
Yeah, I used to find the nearer you sit to the pitch, you realise how fast some of these guys are. You can actually see, and I can see why sometimes people get more annoyed nearer the pitch. They can see a bit more than you can further back when someone's tugged or pulled or kicked. So it is quite interesting where you sit.
Yeah. I prefer to sit at a nice angle. I don't like being pitch side at all.
No, we're at 3/4 of the way up. I love it. It's a fantastic view at the CBS.
So then the year after the East Stand was opened, they extended the main stand. They refurbished the main stand, if you remember. There you go. And they took away the executive boxes and extended the seats right down to the pitch. Put a new roof on. And of course, that structure only lasted 10 years because we moved in 2005. And for a while, they had that silly little, that was a Twickenham stand, wasn't it?
Yeah.
In the corner for hospitality.
Yeah, I still maintain we could have filled the corners in. I think we could have done. We didn't have to move. That's my opinion. I still think we could have, at the back of the Sky Blue stand, there's so much room in Thackle Street. We could have gone back. If they built at Villa Park, they built at Anfield, which is far more restricted than it was around Highfield Road. And I think we could have, for the amount of seats we've gained at the CBS. I know you've got the aesthetics is different because of the layout and what you can do at the CBS, obviously, because you've got the whole the area around the building, you know, so you could actually do more there. I mean, there's potential to make that ground bigger, really.
Well, there is, but let's not forget that when it was planned, the club owned it.
Yeah,
and they had great plans, you know, for using it for hospitality far more, for using it probably as a community hub and for getting events there on 365 days a year. But, you know, the ownership issue put the kibosh on all that, didn't it?
Well, most definitely. Most definitely. I mean, we're going to come to a close soon. We've sort of skated along and covered the history of the main points of Highfield Road. What do you think was in all that time the biggest change at Highfield Road that's in your memory?
Well, I think the development in the 60s, you know, it went from being a tin pot ground, it really was on its uppers. They built those 3 stands in 4 or 5 years, and yet there were parts of the ground that you could see what it had been like, because, you know, like the brick walls, you know, when you were going through the turnstiles into the West End, you know, it was the original brick walls. So there was lots of evidence of what the ground had looked like.
So how old were you, Jim, when you first went?
I was 10 when I first went.
So have you got a memory from then? Can you go in?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I've got strong memories of it being an old-fashioned stadium. You know, and you know, as I got older, you know, my late teens, you realise, or my mid-teens, you realise that, God, it's a bit of a dump, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, you know, all credit to Robbins and Hill for having that foresight, for bringing us into the modern era for stadiums. And it was one of the top stadiums in the country. There's no question. And
I'm at the other end, because obviously there's about 10 years difference between us. So first time I saw it, it was pretty much built as the modernised stadium. So for me, as a 5, I can remember just walking up to the ground. I get goosebumps now, through the main stand. Everything looked massive for a start when you're 6 years old.
Yeah.
And it just felt like is it over the top to say it felt like a cathedral? You know, it was huge. It's a huge, vast area full of thousands of people. And it is quite, I mean, I can imagine what kids feel like now going to the CBS. You know, little kids when they're going in, seeing all these people in the stadium. Yeah. And for me, walking to Highfield Road, just the whole walk up to King Richard Street, all that, everything about it was just magical, basically.
Yeah.
And I went with my dad, obviously holding his hand, feeling safe and all the rest of it. And it was a magical time. as a young boy, and I think those years, there's so many great moments. I mean, maybe not so many great games, but there's definitely some great moments in that stadium. And I mean, looking ahead, I feel, I mean, it's 20 years, isn't it?
20 years next year, yeah.
20 years next year at the CBS, which is madness, isn't it already?
It is. It is.
It's like only now, in the last 7 years, say, that we feel like it's starting to feel like what Highfield Road was, if that makes any sense. I think
the atmosphere has changed enormously since we came back from Birmingham, hasn't it? It's a different club. It's a completely different club, and the fans have got on board. Obviously, we've had success. You know, that does help, doesn't it?
Well,
yeah, and football culture is massive now, isn't it? You know, you look at the away followings, you look at the scramble to get away tickets for Coventry fans, and there's a number of other clubs that are in the same boat, I think.
Are you going to Stoke?
I am, yes.
No, I'll see you there. Yes. Yeah. And well, that brings us nicely onto the start of the season. What are your thoughts?
Well, don't ask me to make predictions.
No predictions.
Last season, I finished bottom of the London Supporters Club Prediction League.
That results.
And I tell you what, I've done it this season. I've predicted us with only 60 points.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, you're going conservative, are you?
Well, I don't know. I think, to me, I know Oggy goes on about the goals conceded. For me, the big issue is home form. You know, people say, "Oh, the CBS is a fortress." It wasn't last season. We only won 9 games. The top 6 all won 15 or more.
Yeah, and this is something I've mentioned as well. We've got to win games at home. We have to win at home.
Yeah, 8 draws, not good enough.
No. So
okay, a lot of them we should have won, but we didn't. So we've got to improve that home form.
And it's highlighted by Mark Robbins. He's even mentioned it. He's even said it, so he knows.
Has he?
Yeah, and the thing is, it's the key factor is the home support, because majority of people see you play at home.
Yeah.
You know, you can't all go away. I know people can watch games on Fire Sticks and all the rest of it, but you can't. I mean, now Sky are covering virtually every single game, but the majority of fans are watching you at home. Yeah, and that's when you've got to really impress, and that's where
absolutely,
that's the way it is.
And you know, if you look at our history, when we've won promotion from in 1936, 1967, 2020. We only lost 1 home game in those 3 seasons.
That's impressive. Yeah, that's impressive. So
you've got to do it. You've got to do it at home.
Well, I've enjoyed tonight, Jim. That was really good.
Excellent.
And if you want to talk about any particular part of our Sky Blue history, please email Jim at clarryborton@gmail.com. We'll be back next week with a bit more chat about our history. I'm just going to sort myself out here before I do anything. I'm clicking buttons everywhere, Jim, so bear with me. There's so much going on. But I'm going to go back and watch some Olympic highlights now, I think.
Yeah, me too. I watched the 1500. Did you see it?
Yeah, I was disappointed.
Yeah.
He
was too busy watching the Norwegian, wasn't he?
Yeah, I didn't see the little American on the inside.
No.
He got done over there. Right, anyway, it's a good night from me.
Yes. Good night, Claudio. might see you at Stoke.
Oh, you probably will, yes. I'll look out for you.
Okay.
See ya.
Good night.
Good night.
Sky Sky Blue Fans TV. For the fans, by the fans.